Here's Edwards with the leg.
40. This is from 45, and it's blocked.
Davis goes left. Davis gets a block. Donovan Edwards down the sideline. Gets past Ransom.
Lions scoop it up.
Chris Davis. Touchdown, Michigan.
Brad Haley will score.
No flags. The Don.
Welcome to the first episode of Ruling on the Field with Grayson Gifford and Brady back. Brady, how's your day going, man?
Dude, solid. Working that 9 to 5 now. Looking forward to this weekend.
Absolutely. Same here. Big set of games this weekend, two that we really want to focus on. But before we get into that, we just want to introduce ourselves, tell you a little bit about us, where we come from. So I'll start. I'm Grayson Gifford. I was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan. As you can tell, I'm a big Wolverines fan. I was raised in the Mile High City, Denver. I just finished up getting my bachelor's degree in business from a school called Azusa Pacific in Southern California while I played Division II baseball there. I always grew up as a baseball player. It's a sport that I've loved and I've cherished for my entire life. Though it really was my favorite sport to play, the sport that I fell in love with at a young age was college football. It's really what took my mind and all my energy at a young age. My first favorite football player, looking back at it, was Colt McCoy. And so I really got into college football in 2007, and I had two favorite teams, Texas and Michigan. Coincidentally, they're playing this weekend, but I naturally became a Michigan fan just because of my roots. I've watched every Michigan game through the bad and good seasons since I've remembered, studied players, stats, and analytics of the entire sport, all teams, since I was a young age. So I'm very, very excited to finally being able to do this and bring it to life and make it a dream of mine.
Yeah, Brady back here, born and raised in Michigan, Grand Rapids. I'm a west side guy, instead of Grayson on the east side. Grew up on the sidelines, come from a family of coaches. My uncle's in the High School Football Hall of Fame in Michigan, so that's pretty sweet. Obviously, huge Michigan fan. I got the helmet here and everything. Grew up playing football, met Grayson in college. I studied journalism there, and now I'm still out in LA. So, yeah, very different than Big Ten country, but I guess Big Ten country now. So.
Absolutely. So we're going to get into a little bit of a week one recap here, just talk about the teams that really stood out from this week. I think, and there's no better way to do it than the number one team in the country, Georgia. I mean, big win over Clemson, I think 31 to 3, I believe it was 34 to 3. Carson Beck looks like a championship quarterback, and that Georgia defense just looked like the Georgia defense. I think that this is one of the most talented teams in the entire country, but I do have some interesting predictions about how their season will go, and we'll get back to that a little bit later, maybe later this episode or in a different episode. The second team that I think really stood out to me this week was Notre Dame. They have a little bit of a cakewalk of a schedule. I think a lot of people know that, but coincidentally, their hardest games are the first and last games of the year with A&M on the road and USC. But I really think that what stood out to me was Riley Leonard, and he looked like a true veteran leading that team into College Station this last weekend and getting a win. I think Marcus Freeman is starting to hit his stride at Notre Dame, and I think it's going to be very intriguing to see this team and what they can do and how they develop throughout the year.
I think Riley Leonard was really everything I think Notre Dame fans thought Sam Hartman was going to be last year. For as cool as his hair was last year, I think Riley Leonard's actually a guy that can win more than 9 or 10 games at Notre Dame.
No, absolutely. And I think that, the story that Riley has is also intriguing to watch. Don't be surprised to see him in New York at the end of the year, but you also never know what can happen during the season. The next team I want to talk about is Texas. And man, did that Texas team look like a vintage Nick Saban Alabama team. I don't know what you thought watching that game. I thought Colorado State, just with a few of their guys, was going to hold that spread a little bit closer, but that just did not happen, did not even score a point.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's Colorado State. It's a good win, but it's also Colorado State. Like, it's not like, I don't know. I don't put too much stock in that. Texas looked good. I mean, Ewers had, I think in the second quarter, like the dumbest pick of all time, kind of just threw it up to get out of a sack. But Texas looked good. There's a reason I think that a lot of people peg them as like the only team, not the only team, but one of the teams that can compete with Georgia in the SEC this year.
Absolutely. And I think Quinn Ewers, aside from that pick, for the most part, he looked like one of the top players in this upcoming draft class. Arch Manning also had a great showing. And one of the players that I really want to focus on here is freshman Ryan Wingo. What a week for him. I'm just really excited to see what he continues to do. Build. He was their top receiver in terms of yards this last week. I'm excited to see where the program continues to move, especially under Steve Sarkisian. And they really do have a big test in week 2. So we'll get back to that in our next part of this episode. Anything else on Texas?
Yeah, I mean, I think we know Texas is good enough to make the playoff. They did it last year. I think they're a snap or two away from playing Michigan in the national championship last year. And it's going to be the same story with the last year's team. This team is going to go as far as Quinn Ewers can take them. And that's ultimately the guy that's going to be the reason they win the SEC or not this year.
The fourth team that I really want to focus on is Miami. And Miami had like quite a statement this week. And to be quite honest with you, I was not high on Miami going into this season. They have a history of having great recruiting classes, bringing in great guys, and just producing a terrible product on the field and not having the right coaching to really bring winning to that university, to that program. But Mario Cristobal might have hit his stride this last week. They are clear front runners in the ACC, and I was really impressed to see what they did, especially watching Cam Ward. He looks like a Heisman contender. What do you think about them?
Yeah, this is the first time I think in my lifetime that Miami's felt like those vintage late 90s, early 2000s Miami teams. I think watching Cam Ward, you can kind of tell like it feels like there's a juice or like a hype around Miami again. The guy's like the most nonchalant quarterback of all time. He'll drop back, scramble for 15 yards, and jog on his way out of bounds. It's if he put in like an ounce more of effort, I think he could lead all quarterbacks in rushing this year. It's insane.
Absolutely. The fifth team I want to talk about is Ole Miss. What Lane Kiffin is doing at Ole Miss is fantastic. I believe that Ole Miss is going to be a playoff team this year, and they sure looked like one, especially with Heisman candidate and my pick to win it, Jackson Dart. I think that Ole Miss is going to surprise a lot of people, and that transfer portal class that they had this year is going to pay dividends for them. So I'm very excited to continue watching Ole Miss and see how they perform down the road this season. Anything on Ole Miss?
Yeah, I mean, losing Quinshad Judkins is going to be a huge blow to any team offensively. Jackson Dart, obviously, you just said he's a Heisman candidate. I don't know if I think he gets an invite to New York, but I do think he will be the reason that Ole Miss finally makes a playoff, because it kind of felt like they were right there a few years with Matt Corral, but Dart feels like the guy to finally take him over the edge.
Absolutely. And he's not a very favorited pick to win the Heisman this year. He's a dark horse pick for me, but I like to be a little bit bold in how I analyze college football. He's that guy that I think is going to end up there, and not a lot of people expect it. And depending on how his season goes, I think he could win the Heisman this year. The last team that stood out to me this week was Louisville. 2 years ago, when Jeff Brom left Purdue after that Big Ten championship loss to Michigan, I said that he was going to be the next big thing wherever he went. And boy, I really think that's going to be the case. My preseason pick to win the ACC this year did not happen to be Florida State. It was not Clemson, and it was not Miami. I was very bold with this. I said Louisville was going to win the ACC. I'm very high on them, and I think that their schedule does them favors, especially in terms of creating a path for them to be in contention for the ACC title. There's nothing too special from Tyler's show this last weekend, but in a way, he kind of had a JJ McCarthy kind of day, right? Nothing too flashy. He was 18 for 24, not too much passing, but 232 yards, 4 touchdowns, and they got the shutout. Louisville looked fantastic. And actually going back to Tyler, his QB rating this last weekend was 211. Fantastic stuff from him. I think that this team's going to surprise a lot of people. I do have them winning the ACC and making the playoff, and I will stand by my word after their performance, even with how impressed I was with Miami and how they did at Florida. Anything on Louisville?
Yeah, I don't think I didn't have Louisville winning the ACC this year. I had Miami going into the season. I think Louisville is one of those teams who can be really good and they can compete, and they'll probably end up playing for that ACC championship, but I don't think they're making the playoff. They feel like they're a high bowl team that's not the Holiday Bowl. They'll play in the Citrus Bowl or something nice like that. The first like big bowl game that's not a playoff game.
Absolutely. And, they're either going to be in one of those games or they're going to be in the playoff. I don't see two ACC teams making the playoff this year. I think most people feel that way as well. But I think Louisville, like I said, is going to surprise a lot of people. Um, I don't think they were ranked to begin the season, if I recall. But just expect them to fly up the boards a little bit, and there isn't much that should get in their way. Maybe Clemson. So that's it for the week one recap. Anything else?
No, I think week one was probably the best week one slate we've had in a while that I can remember. And it's a much stronger card than week two.
Absolutely. Let's get into week two. Do you have anything to talk about week two?
Yeah, I think obviously the biggest game in the country and maybe all season is going to be Michigan, Texas. Two playoff teams from last year. I think it's a first real test for Sharon Moore and whoever Michigan trots out at quarterback this weekend.
No, absolutely. One of the things about Texas that I think is going to be interesting to watch this weekend is how they're able to control the run game at Michigan. Now, if I really will have to analyze this game and what I think about it, this is what has to happen for Michigan. Michigan needs to have good quarterback play, plain and simple. If Davis Warren can be a good quarterback, Michigan will win this game, especially with Texas having a questionable interior defensive line and Michigan being able to run the ball as well as they usually do. I think that can pose challenges for Texas being able to contain that. But Davis Warren has to make this, a dual threat offense, something that can challenge Texas in two different ways. Now, Texas -7 does look like one of the easiest bets to take this week. I believe it's actually now 7.5, so it's a little bit more tough. But that's why people are betting on it, especially after last week's game Michigan played against Fresno State, as well as that game Texas played against Colorado State. It all seems realistic to take Texas -7. If I was an outsider, I really would take that bet. But let me tell you this. I was very, very concerned about Michigan and their performance last week. It felt like their offense wasn't getting it done. Davis Warren really threw one ball down the field, if I can recall, and it was underthrown and picked off. So nothing felt really exciting and felt as if Michigan was that good offensively as we had heard in those offseason reports leading up to the first game. But then I went back and I watched the game again. And it really felt like Michigan was running the same 6-7 plays offensively the entire game. I don't know if you noticed that. Will Johnson played half the snaps in the first half. Donovan Edwards didn't even take the majority of the rushing yards or even the carries in that game. It was Khalil Mullins. So what if Michigan just didn't open up the playbook at all? Sharon Moore has been molded under Coach Jim Harbaugh in a way where he didn't love to share game plans when they don't have to. And all the craziest plays Michigan had were in their biggest games: Ohio State, Penn State, Iowa, and Alabama, all games that they needed to win to continue their season. I think that with this Texas game early in the season, something Michigan has not had in a while, it was important to keep that playbook under wraps for Sharon Moore, or at least in his mind.
Yeah, I mean, you're playing Fresno State. It's a night game at home in week one. I don't think you really need to reinvent the wheel to win that game. No, and I think the way Michigan wins this game is finding a way to get Donovan Edwards the ball and something more than just a halfback dive. And I think we'll see some of those trick plays we haven't seen from Michigan, unless it's in a big spot, like you said, like that jump pass on 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1 against Ohio State, the flea flicker in the Iowa Big Ten championship game. I think Sharon Moore's going to get creative with some of those this week.
Absolutely. And expect Donovan Edwards to throw a pass this week.
Yeah,
I don't know what you're thinking about, but I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, the guy's got a cannon. We've seen him do it. He's a stud.
Absolutely. I think that it is very likely Texas will struggle a little bit more offensively in this game than most people think, especially with the caliber of defense that Michigan has. Anything on Colorado and Nebraska?
Yeah, I think it's the only real game I think America's going to be paying attention to this weekend outside of what's going on in Ann Arbor. I think this is the first real test of the Raiola era. I mean, obviously it's a second game, so no doubt it's his first real test. But I think this is the real first Nebraska team under Matt Rule that feels like it could kind of live up to some of the things Scott Frost promised him. It's going to be a fun quarterback game. Shador and Rayola on the other side. It's going to be awesome.
What do you think of Shedeur Sanders?
I don't know, man. He's fun to watch. I mean, kid's got a cannon. I think his biggest issue is he doesn't have an offensive line. And because of that, I think he's a pocket passer. I don't think he's a scrambler. But with no offensive line, he's got no time to develop.
I also think he's a pocket passer. I also think he's maybe lacked a little bit of defensive competition that he's had to face. I personally think if his last name was Smith, he would not be a first-round pick. I don't know what you think about that.
Pretty true.
I've just never been high on Shedeur, but Travis Hunter is legit. He will be a top 5 pick in this year's draft. He's a top 10 cornerback and a top 5 wideout. There's so much untapped potential, but I look at their schedule and I say there's no way they're winning more than 5.5 games.
No, there's a reason their win total was like I think it was 5.5.
No, absolutely. And then on the other hand, what Matt Rule is doing in Nebraska is just fantastic. Dylan Raiola is a legitimate quarterback, and I believe that they will not only win this game, but they will cover the spread. I think Nebraska potentially could be a legit team in the Big Ten this year. They will make a lot of noise. And when they go into that Ohio State game, they will either have one loss or they will be undefeated. Watch out for this Nebraska team, and I'm excited to watch them this Saturday.
Yeah, that'll be a fun one for sure. Let's go biggest winner of week 1. Grayson, who do you got?
Biggest winner week 1, I love Miami Hurricanes. A lot of people were not so high on Miami this year. Some were. Like I said, even though I thought they were overrated, they showed up huge in a tough environment this weekend. Cam Ward is legit. If he has a season like the game he played last weekend, he will be in New York this December. He is super composed, and he is one of the most fun quarterbacks to watch in all of college football. This team should be on the sole favorite to win the ACC. Unfortunately, I am a man of my word, so I have to stick with Louisville as my pick, especially after their performance this last weekend. But if anything changes, Miami might be right there to take it.
Yeah, I think Cam Ward showed the reason why he was the number 1 transfer quarterback portal. He's the guy. I think he's the guy Ohio State really wanted, and then had to end up settling for Will Howard. Like I said earlier, he's cool. I mean, he's the definition of cool quarterback. And Miami's dominating the state of Florida right now. Florida stinks. Florida State stinks even worse. Miami is the school to be at right now in Florida. Biggest loser of the week, I've got Virginia Tech. Easy answer here is Florida State. I think Virginia Tech was a team with a lot of promise coming into this season. Kyron Drones finally named the starter. And I think I had them winning the ACC, or one of the teams that could compete in the ACC. And I think just losing to Vandy, I know it's a road game, I know it's an SEC game, but Vandy doesn't count. It's embarrassing.
Absolutely, and I get that. Any other week I would take Florida State, but they lost to Georgia Tech the week before. My biggest loser of the week is Alex Orji. Unfortunately, most people in Michigan and even around the country felt as if he should be the commanding quarterback this season for the offense, and rightfully so. If you look at his physical build, there's nobody like him. Maybe Jalen Milroe. He is one of a kind. He's one of the most physically talented and built quarterbacks that we've seen in college football in a long time. However, before the news broke out a few hours before game time, I had heard some rumbling around that Davis Warren could be the quarterback for Michigan a day or two before. We did get to see both quarterbacks in action last week against Fresno State. And obviously Davis Warren looked a little bit more complete. Even though he didn't look great, he was blowing it out of the water compared to Alex Orji. If you were watching that game and you saw that bounce pass that he made on a 10-yard throw, scrambling out to his right, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think neither of Michigan's quarterbacks looked like studs this weekend. If you've watched any snap of that game, it's pretty obvious. I think Warren's a better pocket passer, but like I said, I feel like this job was Orji's to lose all summer. And unfortunately, that's kind of what happened.
Absolutely. But don't let your hopes down on Davis Warren. I really think that he has potential to be a great quarterback for Michigan, but we have to see how he handles that adversity from last week and how he translates it coming up on a big test against Texas this weekend.
Yep, totally. All right, top 10. Obviously, rankings don't mean much now after 1 week, but who do you got at number 1?
I got Georgia. I think they're the number 1 team in the country to start the season, and covering the spread by almost 20 against actually covering it by 20 against Clemson. That's beautiful work. They looked like a championship team, looked like the Georgia that everybody thinks they are. They stay at 1 for me.
Yeah, it's no shocker. Georgia's the number 1 team. Probably should have made the playoff last year. Thankful they didn't. But yeah, Georgia's 1. I've got Ohio State too. They looked like crap for a quarter against Akron, but Will Howard turned it on. They've got a $20 million roster. They should be number 2.
Absolutely. And I get why they're number 2. I do think Ohio State is one of the most talented teams in the country, but I switched up a little bit, maybe to bring up the anticipation this week, but I have Texas at number 2. Texas is my pick to win the SEC this year over Georgia. I think that Texas is one of the most complete rosters in college football. Steve Sarkisian is doing all the right things. And we saw how that team looked against Colorado State last week. It was beautiful. Everything looked right. The defense was stout. I'm excited to watch this Texas team throughout the year, and they proved themselves as a top ranking team in the country this week.
Yeah, I've got Texas right there at 3. I think we're going to find out really what this team is come Saturday.
Absolutely. My third team I have is Ohio State. Like you said, they're one of the top teams in the country, $20 million roster. Will Howard's a legit quarterback. Let's talk a little bit about Jeremiah Smith. We have a wideout that potentially could be one of the greatest prospects to come out of college football in a long time. He impressed. He was their top receiver this last week. What do you think?
Yeah, the kid's a stud. I think one of the most impressive receivers is a bit of a stretch for a guy that's played 1 game. But he's a stud. He's the next guy at Ohio State because it feels like they always have 4 or 5 receivers that can go to the NFL in a given 3-4 year span.
No, absolutely. And, I watched a little bit of him when he was in high school and kept tabs on him. But some of the things he did at Chaminade High School was just ridiculous. And when I saw that he was going to Ohio State and when he committed to Ohio State, I just knew that he was going to be a great prospect. And we saw a little bit of a hint of it this week. We'll obviously see how his freshman year goes, how he progresses through the season. But I'm excited to watch what he does, and I think he has potential to be a great candidate in the years going forward for potentially a high draft pick and maybe a Heisman Trophy in his future.
Yeah. Back to the top 10, I've got Notre Dame at 4. Big win on the road at A&M. They control their own destiny.
Yeah. I like Notre Dame this week. I thought they were impressive. But I don't think that they slide all the way up there quite yet for me. I think they slide up 1 ranking to number 6. My number 4 team in the country is Ole Miss. I'm high on Ole Miss this year. Ole Miss impressed me. Everything looked great on that team. It was 0 mistakes, was kind of what it felt like just watching their tape. I'm excited to see what they continue to do, especially with that transfer portal class and Lane Kiffin's doing all the right things.
Yeah, Ole Miss is not in my top 10, but I do have another SEC school at 5. I've got Tennessee. I think Nico's the best quarterback in the country, and he's my pick. As if I had to give a dark horse guy for the Heisman, bet Nico right now.
That's a bold pick. I haven't heard anybody say Tennessee in the top 10 yet.
Yeah, they played Chattanooga last week, but their offense looked fantastic. So I'm high on Tennessee.
They did, and that's a team to watch. It's a dark horse in SEC even throughout the season. I don't remember how their schedule lines up, whether their tough games are at home and who all they play. I do know they play Georgia, and I'm very excited to see what that team does as well. My number 5 team is Alabama. Kalen DeBoer came in and had to really take over a program with high expectations and standards, and they looked just like Alabama this last weekend. I think that they're going to continue to be a strong force in the SEC, and I'm excited to see what they do in the weeks going forward, especially with some of their tough matchups coming up in the next month.
Yeah, I've got Alabama at 6 for all the same reasons you just said. So who do you have at 6?
I have Notre Dame at 6.
Okay.
Like they said, impressive win this weekend. They won't have a lot to prove on their schedule. I wouldn't be surprised to see them undefeated at the end of the year. They do have USC. I don't really see anybody getting in their way. But as teams start to lose and they start to kind of maybe hold their end of the bargain and keep winning games, I think we'll continue to see their rank fly up the board.
Yeah, I've got 7, Penn State at 7. Really weird game with the weather at West Virginia last weekend. But I think Drew Aller's going to look better than he did last year. And they're a top 3 or 4 team in the Big Ten.
Absolutely. And, I have Penn State at 7 too. One of the things that stuck out to me that Drew Aller was the elite touch that he had on his balls this week. We watched some of his big games last season, and he failed to execute the easier throws in the big moments. But what we saw from him is the ability to comfortably make throws from the pocket. I was really impressed to see how he was this weekend, and it was exciting, especially after a year where I don't think he lived up to his expectations in 2023. I'm excited to see what he does this year.
Totally. I've got Oregon at 8. They struggled with Idaho for 3 quarters there, but I think Oregon's still a top 10 team in the country.
Absolutely. I have them at 8 too. I think that Idaho game's enough to slip them back a lot, but I have them as winning the national championship this year. So that was a little bit of a tough beat for me with my pick, seeing them fly down the board with that early Idaho struggle, but expect them to bounce back. And I know that Boise State's coming off a big week, but expect Oregon to cover the spread this week. Oregon's going to look like Oregon again.
Yeah, I've got Miami at 9. I mean, Florida stinks this year, but going to the Swamp, beating them at home is still pretty impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. I have Miami in my top 10, but number 9, I have Missouri. Brady Cook, Luther Burden, those are just 2 guys that I think look great. They're going to have a great year this year. I'm excited to see what they do.
Yeah, number 10, I've got Michigan. They look terrible for 3 quarters there against Fresno State. They don't really have a quarterback yet this year. Their defense is still elite. So they're still a top 10 team in the country.
I have Michigan at 11. I have Miami at number 10. I was very impressed with how Miami was this weekend. I'm excited to see what both teams continue to do going forward. And Michigan has a big test this weekend.
All right, last section of the first episode of Ruling on the Field podcast. We are going to get into best bets, and I want to remind you guys to all have a day. So I'm wearing this hat while I give you the picks that are going to make you money this weekend. Let's start with Kansas minus 4.5. There is no way the Illinois defense is going to be able to contain Jalen Daniels in that strong Kansas offense. Next, Iowa minus 2. At home against Iowa State. Yes, it's a rivalry game, and Iowa State has a way of getting the good teams. But I think this Iowa team has a much better and improved offense from last season, and I expect them to cover at home. Lastly, if you want to have some fun with a plus money line pick, go with Syracuse at plus 125 on ESPN Bet. I love Kyle McCord over at Syracuse. He's a huge addition to the Syracuse team, and they are playing an overrated ranked Georgia Tech team that is only in that position because they knocked off a terrible Florida State team.
Awesome. I think that wraps it up for episode 1.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody, thank you for joining us for our first episode. We're excited to continue building this and have you guys along for the ride. Just like and subscribe and share with all your friends. Excited to be along for it. Thanks, Brady.
Thank you. Go Blue.
Go Blue, man.